David Collins, a kind-hearted man, had no idea that his life would change forever the day he met Elijah, a young black boy, playing alone in the park. For weeks, Elijah waved at an imaginary dad, his smile full of hope and innocence. But when David learned the heartbreaking truth, that Elijah had lost both his parents and was in foster care, their bond deepened. What David does next to change this boy's life will leave you speechless. What moved David to step into Elijah's world? And how did this simple gesture ripple into something much greater? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. If this story of love, compassion, and second chances resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting the suburban neighborhood in warm hues of orange and gold. David, a white man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a few laugh lines, locked the front door of his cozy two-story home. His two children, Emily and Ethan, bounced excitedly on the sidewalk, their energy seemingly unaffected by the long summer day. "All right, troops," David said with a grin. "Ready for our evening adventure?" 8-year-old Emily, her blonde pigtails swinging, pumped her fist in the air. "Part-time." 6-year-old Ethan, clutching a well-worn stuffed dinosaur, nodded eagerly. "Can we stay extra long today, Dad?" "Please." David chuckled, ruffling Ethan's hair. "We'll see, buddy. Let's get moving before it gets dark." The trio set off down the quiet street, the children's chatter filling the air. Neighbors waved from porches, and the scent of barbecues wafted on the breeze. It was a perfect late summer evening, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. As they rounded the corner, the local park came into view. A colorful playground stood at its center, surrounded by neatly trimmed grass and towering oak trees. Emily and Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight. "Last one, there's a rotten egg," Emily shouted, taking off in a sprint. Ethan giggled and ran after her, his little legs working overtime to keep up. David watched them go, a contented smile on his face. This was their ritual, a precious slice of family time carved out of busy days filled with work and school. "Be careful, you two," he called out, quickening his pace to catch up. By the time David reached the playground, Emily was already scaling the jungle gym like a pro, while Ethan made a beeline for the swings. David settled onto a nearby bench, pulling out a book, but keeping one eye on his children. "Higher, Dad," Ethan called out, his legs pumping furiously on the swing. "I want to touch the sky." David set his book aside and stood up. "All right, Captain Ethan, prepare for liftoff." He moved behind the swing, giving Ethan gentle pushes that sent him soaring higher and higher. Emily's voice rang out from the top of the jungle gym. "Dad, look at me. I'm the queen of the castle." David turned, offering her a royal wave. "All hail Queen Emily. May your reign be long and just." As he alternated between pushing Ethan and watching Emily's daring feats of playground acrobatics, David's gaze wandered across the park. That's when he first noticed the boy. He was small, probably around 7 years old, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. The boy stood alone on the far side of the park, near a cluster of trees. What caught David's attention wasn't just that the child was by himself, but what he was doing. The boy held a bright red ball in his hands, tossing it up in the air and catching it. Nothing unusual about that except, "Great catch, Dad," the boy exclaimed, his voice carrying across the quiet park. David blinked, looking around. There was no one else near the boy. No adult, no other children. Just a small figure playing catch with thin air. "Watch this, Dad," the boy called out again, this time spinning in a circle before tossing the ball high. When he caught it, he jumped up and down, clapping his hands. "Did you see that? Wasn't it awesome?" A strange feeling settled in David's chest as he watched the scene unfold. The boy seemed so genuinely happy. His face lit up with joy as he played with his invisible companion. But there was something else there too, something that made David's heart ache. "Dad!" Ethan's voice snapped David back to reality. "Can you push me again?" I stopped. David turned his attention back to his son, giving the swing another push. But his eyes kept drifting back to the boy across the park. The child had moved on from playing catch. Now he was running in circles, occasionally stopping to point at something only he could see. "Look, Dad, a butterfly. It's so pretty." Emily climbed down from the jungle gym and tugged on David's sleeve. "Daddy, Who's that boy talking to? David hesitated, unsure how to explain what they were seeing. I'm not sure, sweetie. It looks like he's playing pretend. Emily's brow furrowed. But why is he all alone? The question hung in the air, and David felt a pang of sadness. I don't know, Em. Sometimes people are alone for all sorts of reasons. As the evening wore on, David found himself more and more distracted by the solitary child. He watched as the boy swung by himself, pushing off the ground with his feet and talking animatedly to his imaginary father. Higher, Dad. Push me higher, the boy called out, his legs pumping furiously. I'm going to touch the clouds. David's hand twitched, a part of him wanting to walk over and give the child a real push. But something held him back. Was it the right thing to do, to intrude on this private moment? Or would it be kinder to let the boy have his game of make-believe? Dad, can we play tag? Ethan asked, hopping off the swing. Please. Emily chimed in. Yeah, Dad. You're it. David hesitated, torn between his children's request and his growing curiosity about the boy across the park. In the end, family won out. All right, you little monsters, he growled playfully, crouching down. Better run fast, because here comes the tickle monster. Squeals of delight erupted as Emily and Ethan took off running, with David in hot pursuit. They darted between the swing set and the slide, laughter echoing across the park. For a few minutes, David was fully immersed in the game, the joy of his children pushing all other thoughts from his mind. But as he chased Ethan around a tree, David caught sight of the boy again. This time, the child was sitting on the grass, legs crossed, talking animatedly to the empty space beside him. And then Billy said that dinosaurs aren't real, but I told him they are because we saw their bones at the museum. Remember, Dad, when you took me there for my birthday? The boy's voice was filled with such conviction, such belief in the reality of his imaginary father, that David felt his throat tighten. How long had this child been coming to the park alone, creating a father out of thin air? Got you! Ethan's triumphant cry broke through David's thoughts. Small arms wrapped around his legs, and David pretended to stumble. Oh no! The mighty Ethan has defeated me! He fell dramatically to the ground, Ethan giggling as he climbed on top of his dad. Emily joined in, flopping onto David's chest. We win? We beat the tickle monster? David wrapped his arms around his children, holding them close. In that moment, the contrast between his reality and the lonely boy's make-believe struck him hard. Here he was, surrounded by the love and laughter of his kids, while just across the park, a child had to invent that love for himself. As the sky began to darken, David reluctantly called an end to their park visit. Time to head home, kiddos. Mom will have dinner ready soon. There were the usual protests and pleas for just 5 more minutes, but eventually Emily and Ethan gathered their things. As they prepared to leave, David cast one last glance toward the boy. To his surprise, the child was looking right at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. The boy offered a small, shy wave, which David returned automatically. Then the child turned away, speaking once more to his invisible companion. Come on, Dad. We should go home too. Race you to the gate. With that, the boy took off running, his imaginary father apparently hot on his heels. David watched until the small figure disappeared around the corner of the park. The walk home was filled with Emily and Ethan's excited recounts of their playground adventures, but David's mind kept drifting back to the boy. Who was he? Where were his parents? And why did he feel the need to create an imaginary father to play with? As they approached their house, the warm glow of the porch light welcoming them home, David made a silent promise to himself. He would return to the park tomorrow, and the day after if necessary. He needed to know more about this child who played alone to understand why he felt compelled to invent a father figure. Maybe, David thought as he ushered his children inside, there was something he could do to help. But for now, all he could do was hold his own kids a little tighter, grateful for the family he had and acutely aware of those who weren't so fortunate. The aroma of Sarah's cooking filled the air as they stepped inside, and the usual chaos of dinner time began. But even as David helped Ethan wash his hands and listened to Emily's detailed description of her castle on the jungle gym, a part of his mind remained in the park, with the boy who had a father only he could see. As he sat down to dinner with his family, David couldn't shake the feeling that his comfortable routine had been forever altered. The boy in the park had opened his eyes to a world beyond his own, and he knew he couldn't simply look away. Whatever happened next, David was certain of one thing. His evenings at the park would never be the same again. The following evening, David found himself eager to return to the park. Throughout the day, his thoughts had frequently drifted to the boy he'd seen, the child who played with an invisible father. As he helped Emily pack her backpack with coloring books and Ethan gather his collection of toy cars, David felt a mix of anticipation and concern. "Ready to go, troops?" David called out, jingling his keys. Emily bounded down the stairs, her blonde ponytail swinging. "Ready, Dad? Can we stay extra long today? I want to finish my picture of the castle." Ethan nodded enthusiastically, clutching his favorite red fire truck. "Yeah, and I want to build a huge sandcastle." David smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair. "We'll see how it goes, buddy. Let's head out before it gets too late." As they walked to the park, David found himself scanning the area, looking for the boy from yesterday. A part of him hoped the child wouldn't be there, that perhaps he'd imagined the whole scene. But as they rounded the corner and the playground came into view, David's heart sank a little. There he was, the same small figure from the day before, playing alone near the swing set. Emily and Ethan raced ahead, eager to start their adventures. David called out his usual reminders, "Be careful, and stay where I can see you," before settling onto the same bench as yesterday. But this time, his book remained unopened in his lap, his attention focused on the solitary child across the playground. The boy, David still didn't know his name, was engaged in what looked like an intense game of hide and seek. He'd cover his eyes, count loudly to 10, then dash around the playground equipment, peering behind trees and bushes. "Found you, Dad," the boy would exclaim periodically, his face lighting up with joy each time he discovered his invisible father. David watched, his heart growing heavier with each passing minute. The boy's imagination was impressive, creating an entire world of play with an unseen companion. But the underlying loneliness was impossible to ignore. After about 20 minutes of this, the boy switched to playing on the monkey bars. "Watch me, Dad," he called out, swinging from bar to bar with surprising agility for his size. I made it all the way across, unable to resist any longer. David stood up and slowly made his way across the playground. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the child or interrupt his game. As he got closer, David could see the boy more clearly. He was small for his age, with warm brown skin and close-cropped black hair. His clothes were clean but well-worn, the knees of his jeans patched in several places. The boy was now sitting on top of the monkey bars, his legs swinging freely. He appeared to be in deep conversation with his invisible dad. "And then we could go get ice cream, right, Dad? With sprinkles and everything." David cleared his throat softly. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise at seeing someone so close. "Hi there," David said gently, offering a warm smile. "That looks like fun. Who are you playing with?" The boy hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between shyness and the desire to share his game. After a brief pause, he pointed to the empty space beside him on the monkey bars. "That's my dad," he said, his voice a mix of pride and defiance, as if daring David to contradict him. "He's really strong and fast. He can do flips on the monkey bars." David's heart clenched at the earnestness in the boy's voice. Instead of questioning or correcting him, he decided to play along. "Wow, your dad sounds like an amazing guy," David said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I bet he's great at all sorts of games, huh?" The boy's face lit up, his earlier wariness melting away. "Yeah, he's the best at everything. He can run super fast and jump really high. And he always lets me win at hide and seek." David chuckled. "That's very nice of him. My name's David, by the way. What's yours?" "I'm Elijah," the boy replied, swinging his legs a bit faster. "I'm 7.5. "It's nice to meet you, Elijah," David said. "Do you and your dad come to the park often?" Elijah nodded enthusiastically. "Every day after dinner. Dad says it's important to get exercise and fresh air." David's mind raced, trying to find the right words to keep the conversation going without prying too much. That's really smart of him. My kids and I try to come here most evenings too. Maybe we'll see each other again sometime. That'd be cool, Elijah said, then turned to the empty space beside him. Right, Dad? We can all play together. David watched as Elijah nodded, apparently listening to his imaginary father's response. The innocence and hope in the boy's eyes were almost too much to bear. Well, Elijah, I should get back to my kids, David said, gesturing towards Emily and Ethan, who were busily constructing an elaborate sand kingdom. But it was really nice talking to you. And, nice to meet your dad, too. Elijah beamed. Dad says it was nice to meet you, too, Mr. David. As David walked back to his bench, his mind was whirling. The interaction had been brief, but it left him with a profound sense of sadness. Why did this little boy feel the need to create an imaginary father? Where were his real parents? For the next hour, David split his attention between his own children and surreptitiously watching Elijah. The boy continued his games, sometimes playing alone, sometimes engaging with his invisible dad. David marveled at the detail of Elijah's imagination. The boy seemed to have an entire personality and backstory created for his pretend father. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, David noticed a group of children entering the park. They were accompanied by a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Something about the way she herded the kids, checking a clipboard and counting heads, made David think she wasn't a parent, but some kind of caregiver. Elijah, who had been in the middle of an animated conversation with his dad about his favorite superheroes, suddenly stopped. He looked at the group, then back at the empty space beside him. I gotta go now, Dad, Elijah said, his voice tinged with sadness. But I'll see you tomorrow, right? Same time, same place. David's heart ached as he watched Elijah hop down from the monkey bars and give the air beside him a quick hug. Then the boy jogged over to join the group of children. Curious, David approached a nearby parent he recognized from previous park visits. Excuse me, he said quietly, do you know anything about that group of kids? The ones with the woman with the clipboard? The other parent, a friendly-looking woman in her 40s, glanced over at the group. Oh, those are the foster kids from the Sunnyside home. They bring them here a few times a week for some outdoor time. David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Foster kids? All of them? The woman nodded. Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? Some of them have been in the system for years. That little boy you were talking to earlier? Elijah, I think his name is. He's been bouncing around foster homes for a while now, poor thing. David watched as Elijah lined up with the other children, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by a quiet compliance. The boy's eyes darted around the playground one last time, as if searching for his imaginary father. Do you know his story? David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Why he's in foster care? The woman shrugged. I don't know all the details, but I've heard bits and pieces from the caregivers. Sounds like his mom passed away when he was really young, and his dad. Well, let's just say he wasn't fit to be a parent. Elijah's been in the system ever since. David felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Sadness, anger, helplessness. And no one's adopted him? He seems like such a sweet kid. It's not always that simple, the woman said, her voice soft with sympathy. Lots of people want to adopt babies or really young kids. Older children like Elijah, they sometimes get overlooked. Plus, I've heard he has some behavioral issues. Nothing major, just the kind of stuff you'd expect from a kid who's been through so much. David watched as the group of foster children filed out of the park, Elijah bringing up the rear. Just before leaving, the boy turned and waved, not at David or anyone else on the playground, but at the empty space near the monkey bars where his imaginary father had been. The realization hit David like a ton of bricks. Elijah, this bright, imaginative little boy, had no one. No real father to play with him. No stable home to return to each night. Instead, he'd created an entire fantasy world, complete with a loving, attentive dad who never missed a park visit. As David gathered his own children and headed home, his mind was racing. How long had Elijah been playing out this scenario? How many evenings had he spent in this park, pretending to have the family he so desperately wanted? The walk home was a blur. Emily chattered about her sand castle, and Ethan proudly showed off a cool rock he'd found, but David could barely focus on their words. His thoughts kept returning to Elijah, to his bright smile, his vivid imagination, and the underlying sadness in his eyes. Once home, David went through the motions of the evening routine, helping with baths, reading bedtime stories, tucking in his children. But his heart wasn't in it. Every time he looked at Emily and Ethan, safe and loved in their beds, he thought of Elijah, probably lying in a foster home, still pretending his dad would be there in the morning. The house was quiet, the soft glow of the kitchen light casting long shadows across the room. David sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. His mind was still at the park, replaying his encounter with Elijah over and over again. Sarah entered the kitchen, her brow furrowed with concern. She'd noticed David's distraction during dinner, the way his eyes had seemed far away even as he helped Ethan cut his chicken and listened to Emily's stories about school. "David," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "What's going on? You've been a million miles away all evening." David looked up, meeting his wife's worried gaze. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain the turmoil in his heart. "I met a boy at the park today," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Elijah. He's 7 years old, and he was pretending to have a dad." Sarah's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "Pretending to have a dad? What do you mean?" David recounted the scene he'd witnessed, Elijah playing alone, talking to thin air, the joy on his face as he interacted with an invisible father figure. As he spoke, he could see the emotions playing across Sarah's face: surprise, sadness, and finally, a deep empathy that made her eyes shine with unshed tears. "Oh, David," she breathed when he finished. "That poor little boy. But why was he alone? Where are his parents?" David's hands tightened around his mug. "He's in foster care, Sarah. Has been for years, apparently. His mother died when he was very young, and his father, well, he wasn't fit to be a parent." Sarah reached across the table, covering David's hand with her own. "So, he has no one? No family at all?" David shook his head, feeling the lump in his throat grow. "No one. He's been bouncing around the system for years. And now he's created this whole fantasy of having a dad who loves him and plays with him. It's heartbreaking, Sarah. I can't stop thinking about him." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the information. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I can't imagine how lonely he must be to create an imaginary parent like that. No child should have to pretend to have a loving family." David nodded, feeling a surge of relief that Sarah understood. "I know, and I feel like we need to do something. I can't just go back to the park tomorrow and pretend I didn't see what I saw, that I don't know what I know now." Sarah squeezed his hand, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You've always had a big heart, David. It's one of the things I love most about you. What are you thinking? How can we help?" David took a deep breath, voicing the idea that had been forming in the back of his mind since he'd left the park. "Do you remember when we talked about fostering? A few years ago, before Emily started school?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You want to foster Elijah?" "I don't know," David admitted. "Maybe, or maybe just fostering in general. But I know I want to do something. That little boy needs someone, Sarah. He needs a real family, not just an imaginary dad who disappears when the park closes." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of David's hand. When she looked up, her eyes were clear and determined. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's do it." David blinked, surprised by her quick agreement. "Really? You're sure?" Sarah nodded. "We've talked about fostering before. We have the space, we have the love to give. And if there are children out there like Elijah who need a family so badly they have to invent one, well, how can we not at least try?" David felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over him. He leaned across the table, pressing a soft kiss to Sarah's lips. "Thank you," he murmured, "for understanding, for being willing to take this on." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand again. "We're in this together, David. Always have been, always will be. Now, what's our next step?" They spent the next hour researching foster agencies in their area, making notes and discussing the process. By the time they went to bed, they had a plan. They would contact a local agency in the morning to inquire about becoming foster parents. The next day was Saturday, and as David and Sarah prepared breakfast, They decided it was time to talk to Emily and Ethan about what they were considering. "Kids," David said as they all sat around the table, plates piled high with pancakes. "Mom and I have something we'd like to talk to you about." Emily looked up, syrup dripping from her fork. "Are we getting a puppy?" she asked excitedly. Sarah chuckled. "No, sweetie, not a puppy. But it is about our family. You know how lucky we are, right? To have each other. To have a home where we're all safe and loved." Ethan nodded solemnly, his mouth full of pancake. Emily tilted her head, looking curious. "Yeah, of course. Why?" David took a deep breath. "Well, not all kids are as lucky as you two. Some children don't have families of their own. They don't have a mom or a dad or a home where they feel safe." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? But where do they live?" "Some of them live in special homes called foster homes," Sarah explained gently, "where other families take care of them for a while. But it's not the same as having your own family." David leaned forward, meeting each of his children's eyes. "Mom and I are thinking about becoming foster parents. That means we might have another child come to live with us for a while. A child who needs a family, even if it's just temporary." There was a moment of silence as Emily and Ethan processed this information. Then Ethan spoke up, his voice small. "Would they sleep in my room?" Sarah smiled. "No, honey. We have that spare room upstairs, remember? We'd set that up for them." Emily's brow was furrowed in concentration. "Is this because of that boy you talked to at the park, Dad? The one who was playing by himself?" David felt a surge of pride at his daughter's perceptiveness. "Partly yes. His name is Elijah, and he doesn't have a family of his own. Seeing him pretending to have a dad, it made me realize how much some kids need help." Emily nodded slowly. "That's really sad. I can't imagine not having you and Mom." She was quiet for a moment, then looked up with determination in her eyes. "I think we should do it. We should help kids like Elijah." Ethan, not wanting to be left out, chimed in. "Yeah, I can share my toys with them. And maybe they want to play Legos with me." David felt his heart swell with love for his children. He reached out, ruffling Ethan's hair and squeezing Emily's hand. "You two are amazing, you know that? This would be a big change for our family. Are you sure you're okay with it?" Both children nodded emphatically. Emily spoke up again, her voice serious beyond her years. "If we can help a kid have a real family instead of pretending, we should do it. It's the right thing to do." Sarah wiped a tear from her eye, smiling at her daughter. "You're absolutely right, Emily. It is the right thing to do." The rest of breakfast was filled with questions from the children. Would they get to meet Elijah? How long would a foster child stay with them? Could they help decorate the spare room? David and Sarah answered as best they could, emphasizing that they were just at the beginning of the process and there was still a lot to learn. After breakfast, while the kids were occupied with a movie, David and Sarah sat down at the computer together. With a deep breath, David typed local foster care agencies into the search bar. "Here goes nothing," he murmured, clicking on the first result. They spent the next hour reading through the agency's website, learning about the requirements for becoming foster parents, the training involved, and the different types of foster care. By the time they finished, they both felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "It's a lot," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair. "The home inspections, the background checks, the training classes. Are we ready for all of this?" David took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we are. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is, right? And just think about the difference we could make in a child's life." Sarah nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're right, and we're not committing to anything yet. We're just taking the first step." David clicked on the Contact Us button, pulling up the agency's email form. Together, they composed a message, introducing themselves and expressing their interest in becoming foster parents. David's finger hovered over the Send button for a moment. "Ready?" he asked, looking at Sarah. She nodded, placing her hand over his on the mouse. "Ready." Together, they clicked Send, watching as the message disappeared into cyberspace. It was done. They had taken the first step. As they closed the computer and went to join their children in the living room, David felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know exactly what the future held, whether they would end up fostering Elijah specifically or another child in need, but he knew they were on the right path. That night, As David tucked Ethan into bed, his son looked up at him with serious eyes. "Dad," he said softly, "do you think Elijah is okay tonight?" Even though he doesn't have a real dad to tuck him in, David felt his heart clench. He smoothed Ethan's hair back from his forehead, considering his answer carefully. "I hope so, buddy. And even if he's not okay right now, we're going to do our best to help kids like him, to make sure they have someone to tuck them in at night." Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Good," he mumbled, his eyes already drifting closed. "Everyone should have someone to tuck them in." As David turned off the light and closed Ethan's door, he felt more certain than ever that they had made the right decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead in their journey to become foster parents, he knew it would be worth it. For Elijah, and for all the children out there pretending to have a family, they would do their best to make a difference. One step at a time, one child at a time, they would try to bring a little more love into the world. The days following David and Sarah's decision to explore fostering were filled with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. They received a response from the foster care agency, setting up an initial meeting to discuss the process. In the meantime, life continued as usual, with work, school, and their regular evening trips to the park. Each time they visited the playground, David found himself scanning the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of Elijah. But for several days, the boy was nowhere to be seen. David tried to hide his disappointment, focusing instead on Emily and Ethan's play, but he couldn't help wondering about Elijah's whereabouts and well-being. It was nearly 2 weeks later when David finally spotted the familiar small figure near the swing set. His heart leapt as he recognized Elijah, once again engaged in conversation with his imaginary father. "Emily, Ethan," David called to his children as they raced toward the playground. "I'm going to talk to a friend for a bit. Stay where I can see you, okay?" Both kids nodded, barely slowing down in their excitement to reach the slides. David took a deep breath and made his way across the park to where Elijah sat on a swing, his feet dragging in the dirt as he swayed gently back and forth. As David approached, he could hear snippets of Elijah's one-sided conversation. "And then Ms. Johnson said my drawing was really good, Dad. She even put it up on the wall. Did you see it when you came to pick me up?" David's heart clenched at the elaborate fantasy world Elijah had created. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle the boy. "Hi there, Elijah. Remember me? I'm David." Elijah's head snapped up, his eyes wide with recognition and a hint of wariness. "Oh, hi, Mr. David," he said quietly, his feet stilling in the dirt. David smiled warmly, crouching down to be at eye level with Elijah. "It's good to see you again. I've been hoping to run into you. How have you been?" Elijah shrugged, his eyes darting between David and the empty space beside him. "I'm okay," he mumbled. David nodded, keeping his voice gentle and encouraging. "That's good. Hey, I was wondering if maybe you'd like to talk for a bit? I'd love to hear about what you've been up to." Elijah hesitated, clearly torn between his shyness and the desire for attention from a real adult. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. David settled himself on the swing next to Elijah, moving slowly so as not to spook the boy. "So, Elijah," he began, keeping his tone light and friendly, "what grade are you in at school?" "Second grade," Elijah replied, his fingers twisting in the chains of the swing. "Second grade? Wow," David said enthusiastically. "That must be exciting. What's your favorite subject?" A small smile tugged at the corners of Elijah's mouth. "I like art class," he admitted. "We get to paint and draw and make things with clay." David grinned, glad to see a bit of enthusiasm from the boy. "Art class sounds awesome. I bet you're really good at it, huh?" Elijah's smile grew a little wider. "Ms. Johnson says I am. She put my picture of a tiger up on the wall last week." "A tiger? That must have been a great drawing," David said. "I'd love to see your artwork sometime. Do you like to draw at home too?" At the mention of home, Elijah's smile faded a bit. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "when I have paper and crayons." David sensed he'd touched on a sensitive subject. He quickly changed tack. "Well, maybe next time you're at the park, you could bring a drawing to show me. I bet you could make an amazing picture of this playground." Elijah nodded, seeming to brighten at the idea. "Yeah, maybe," he said. Then, after a pause, "Do you like to draw, Mr. David?" David chuckled. "Oh, I'm not very good at it. My stick figures barely look like people. but I love seeing other people's art. My daughter Emily likes to draw too. Is Emily your little girl? Elijah asked, glancing over at where Emily and Ethan were playing on the monkey bars. That's right, David said, feeling a warmth in his chest at Elijah's interest. And that's my son, Ethan. They're 8 and 6. Elijah was quiet for a moment, watching the other children play. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft David had to lean in to hear him. It must be nice to have a sister or brother. The wistfulness in Elijah's tone made David's heart ache. It can be, he said gently. But I bet you have friends at school and where you live, right? Elijah shrugged, his eyes fixed on the ground. I guess, but I move a lot, so it's hard to make friends. David nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral despite the sadness he felt. That must be tough. How many homes have you lived in? Elijah's brow furrowed as he thought. I'm not sure. A lot. Miss Clara says I've been in the system for 4 years now. David did some quick math in his head. For years, that meant Elijah had been in foster care since he was barely more than a toddler. The realization hit him hard, and he had to take a deep breath to steady his voice. That's a long time, he said softly. It must be hard, moving around so much. Elijah nodded, then looked up at David with a hint of defiance in his eyes. But my dad always comes with me. No matter where I go, he's there. David felt a lump form in his throat. He knew he should probably discourage this fantasy, but he couldn't bring himself to shatter the boy's coping mechanism. Instead, he simply said, That's good, Elijah. Everyone needs someone they can count on. They sat in silence for a few moments, gently swinging back and forth. David racked his brain for a way to keep the conversation going, to learn more about this resilient little boy. So, Elijah, he finally said, What do you like to do for fun? Besides drawing, I mean? Elijah's face lit up a bit. I like to read, he said, especially books about animals. And I like to play soccer, but I don't get to very often. David smiled, grateful for this glimpse into Elijah's interests. Reading is great. What's your favorite animal to read about? Tigers, Elijah said without hesitation. They're so big and strong, and their stripes are really cool. Tigers are awesome, David agreed. Have you ever been to a zoo to see one in real life? Elijah shook his head, his eyes wide. No, but I really want to. My D-dash, he stopped himself, glancing at the empty space beside him, then back at David. I mean, I hope I can go someday. David's heart broke a little at Elijah's self-correction, at the way he seemed to remember that his dad wasn't real in David's presence. Well, maybe someday we can all go to the zoo together, he said, trying to keep his tone light. My kids love seeing the animals too. Elijah's eyes lit up for a moment, but then doubt crept into his expression. Really, he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Really, David said firmly. It would be fun to go together. Don't you think? Elijah nodded, a tiny smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, it would be. They continued to talk, David gently drawing Elijah out of his shell. He learned that the boy's favorite color was green, that he loved pizza but hated Brussels sprouts, and that he sometimes had trouble sleeping at night because he missed having his own room. As they chatted, David found himself more and more drawn to Elijah. The boy's resilience amazed him. Despite everything he'd been through, Elijah still had moments of joy and enthusiasm. His eyes would light up when he talked about things he loved, and sometimes he'd even let out a small laugh at David's attempts at jokes. But there were also moments that broke David's heart, like when Elijah mentioned casually that he always packed his few belongings in a single backpack, just in case he had to move again. Or when he talked about how he tried to be really good and quiet in his foster homes, hoping that if he was perfect, maybe they'd want to keep him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, David realized they'd been talking for nearly an hour. He looked over to where Emily and Ethan were still playing, now engaged in an elaborate game of make-believe with some other children. I should probably get my kids home for dinner, David said reluctantly. But it's been really great talking to you, Elijah. Elijah nodded, his earlier shyness creeping back in. Yeah, it was nice, he said softly. David stood up, brushing off his pants. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Elijah shrugged. Probably. We usually come every day, unless it's raining. Well, if you're here, maybe we can talk some more, David suggested. And remember, you could bring a drawing to show me if you want. A small smile spread across Elijah's face. Okay, Mr. David, I'll try to remember. As David walked away to collect Emily and Ethan, he felt a mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Joy at the connection he'd made with Elijah, sadness at the boy's situation, and a growing sense of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. That night, after the kids were in bed, David recounted his conversation with Elijah to Sarah. As he spoke, he could see the same emotions he felt reflected in his wife's eyes. "Oh, David," Sarah said when he finished, wiping a tear from her cheek. "That poor little boy. He sounds so sweet and so broken." David nodded, running a hand through his hair. "He is, but he's also incredibly strong, Sarah. The things he's been through, the way he just accepts that he might have to move at any time, it's heartbreaking, but it's also inspiring in a way." Sarah reached out, taking David's hand in hers. "And how are you feeling about all this?" she asked gently. David was quiet for a moment, trying to sort through his tangled emotions. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I feel connected to him in a way I can't really explain. Like I want to protect him, to give him all the things he's been missing." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I know," she said softly. "I can hear it in your voice when you talk about him. You care about him already." David nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I do," he whispered. "And I can't help thinking, what if it was Emily or Ethan in his situation? What if our kids were the ones bouncing from home to home, never knowing if they'd have to pack up and leave tomorrow?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can't even imagine," she said. "No child should have to live like that." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "So, what do we do now?" David took a deep breath. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but I know I want to keep talking to Elijah, to be there for him in whatever way I can. And I think we need to move forward with the fostering process. Even if we can't help Elijah specifically, there are so many kids out there who need a stable home, even if it's just temporary." Sarah nodded, a determined look settling on her face. "You're right. We have so much love to give, David. We need to share it with the children who need it most." As they went to bed that night, David's mind was still on Elijah. He thought about the boy's shy smile, his enthusiasm when talking about tigers, the way his eyes lit up at the idea of going to the zoo. And he thought about the sadness underlying it all, the loneliness, the uncertainty, the desperate need for stability and love. David made a silent promise to himself and to Elijah as he drifted off to sleep. He would be there for that little boy in whatever way he could. He would show Elijah that there were adults who cared, who saw him as more than just another kid in the system. And maybe, just maybe, they could give Elijah the one thing he wanted most, a real family, not just an imaginary one. Over the next few weeks, David made it a point to seek out Elijah every time they visited the park. Sometimes their conversations were brief. Just a quick hello and a chat about Elijah's day at school. Other times, they talked for an hour or more, David learning more and more about the boy's life, his hopes, and his fears. Elijah began to open up more, sharing stories about his various foster homes. Some good, some not so good. He told David about the nice family he'd stayed with for 6 months, the longest he'd been in one place, and how sad he'd been when they'd told him they couldn't keep him permanently. "I thought maybe they'd want to adopt me," Elijah confided one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they said they were moving to another state and couldn't take me with them." David's heart clenched at the pain in Elijah's voice. "That must have been really hard," he said gently. Elijah nodded, kicking at the wood chips beneath the swing. "It's okay, though," he said, trying to sound brave. "My dad told me it wasn't my fault. He said sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, but it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me." David had to swallow hard past the lump in his throat. Even in his fantasies, Elijah was trying to protect himself from the pain of rejection. "Your dad sounds very wise," he managed to say. As the days went by, David found himself looking forward to these conversations more and more. He loved seeing Elijah's face light up when he spotted David across the playground. Loved the way the boy would sometimes run over to show him a new drawing or tell him about something exciting that had happened at school. Emily and Ethan had started to notice David's growing friendship with Elijah too. One evening, As they were walking home from the park, Emily tugged on David's sleeve. "Dad," she said, her voice serious. "When is Elijah going to come live with us?" David was taken aback by the question. I don't know, sweetie," he said honestly. "We don't know yet which child will be placed with us. But we're one step closer to helping a child who needs a home." Emily nodded, seeming to consider this. "Well, if he does come to live with us, can he share my art supplies? I think he'd really like the new colored pencils Grandma got me." David felt a rush of love and pride for his daughter. "That's very kind of you, Em," he said, ruffling her hair. "I'm sure Elijah would love that." As they continued their walk home, David's mind whirled with possibilities. He and Sarah had attended their first fostering information session, and they were in the process of filling out the initial paperwork. But the idea of actually bringing a child into their home, of potentially giving Elijah the family he so desperately needed, still felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. That night, as David lay in bed, he found himself imagining what it would be like to have Elijah as part of their family. He pictured the boy's shy smile at the breakfast table, thought about helping him with his homework, imagined taking him to the zoo to see those tigers he loved so much. The more David thought about it, the more right it felt. Elijah needed a family, and David was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, their family needed Elijah too. The summer sun cast long shadows across the living room as David and Sarah sat at the dining table, surrounded by a sea of paperwork. They had been working for hours, filling out form after form, each one bringing them one step closer to their goal of becoming foster parents. "I never realized there would be so much paperwork," Sarah sighed, stretching her arms above her head. David nodded, rubbing his eyes. "It's a lot, but it's worth it. Every signature brings us closer to helping Elijah and kids like him." Just then, Emily poked her head into the room. "Mom, Dad, can we go to the park now? You promised we could go after dinner." David glanced at his watch, surprised to see how late it had gotten. "Of course, sweetie. Let's go get Ethan ready." As they walked to the park, David's mind wandered to Elijah. Would he be there today? The boy had become a constant presence in his thoughts, his shy smile and resilient spirit leaving an indelible mark on David's heart. Sure enough, as they approached the playground, David spotted Elijah sitting alone on the swings. But this time, instead of talking to an imaginary father, the boy's eyes lit up as he saw David and his family approach. "Mr. David," Elijah called out, waving excitedly. David's heart swelled. "Hey, buddy, how are you doing today?" As Emily and Ethan ran off to play, David settled onto the swing next to Elijah. They chatted about Elijah's day at school, his latest art project, and his ongoing fascination with tigers. All the while, David couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to have these conversations every day, to be a real, constant presence in Elijah's life. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, David and Sarah sat on the couch, discussing their progress with the fostering process. "The social worker called today," Sarah said, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. "We have our home inspection scheduled for next week." David nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation in his stomach. "That's great news. Do you think we're ready?" Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand. "I think we are. We've been preparing for weeks. The spare room is set up, we've child-proofed everything, and most importantly, our hearts are ready." David smiled, bringing Sarah's hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "You're right. We can do this. For Elijah, and for any other child who needs us." The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. David and Sarah attended fostering classes, learning about trauma-informed care, attachment issues, and the unique challenges faced by children in the foster system. They underwent background checks, met with social workers, and prepared their home and their hearts for the possibility of welcoming a child into their lives. Through it all, their bond with Elijah continued to grow. The boy became a regular fixture in their park visits, and David found himself looking forward to their conversations more and more. He learned about Elijah's favorite subjects in school, his dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and his secret fear of thunderstorms. As the weeks turned into months, David and Sarah's dream of becoming foster parents inched closer to reality. They passed their home inspection with flying colors, completed all required training, and finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, received the call they had been hoping for. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the social worker's voice crackled over the phone. I'm pleased to inform you that you've been approved as foster parents. David felt his knees go weak with relief and excitement. That's wonderful news. Thank you so much. After hanging up, David and Sarah embraced, tears of joy streaming down their faces. We did it, Sarah whispered. We really did it. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. David and Sarah double-checked the spare room, making sure it was ready for a child. They stocked up on extra toiletries, bought a variety of healthy snacks, and made sure they had clothes in various sizes on hand. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, they received another call from the social worker. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we have a potential placement for you, she said. It's a 7-year-old boy named Elijah. He's currently in a group home and needs a more stable environment. Would you be willing to foster him? David felt his heart stop for a moment. Could it really be their Elijah? The boy they had grown to love over the past few months? Yes, David said without hesitation, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, we would love to foster Elijah. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. There were more forms to fill out, more meetings with social workers, and countless preparations to make. Through it all, David and Sarah could hardly believe that their dream was finally coming true. Finally, the day arrived. David and Sarah stood nervously in their living room, Emily and Ethan beside them, as they waited for the social worker to arrive with Elijah. When the doorbell rang, David took a deep breath and opened the door. There, standing next to the social worker, was Elijah. The boy looked small and scared, clutching a battered backpack to his chest. "Hello, Elijah," David said gently, crouching down to the boy's level. "Welcome to our home." Elijah's eyes darted around nervously before settling on David's face. A flicker of recognition passed over his features. "Mr. David," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're my new foster dad?" David nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "That's right, buddy. Sarah and I are going to be your foster parents. Is that okay with you?" Elijah nodded slowly, a tiny smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I'd like that." As they let Elijah into the house, introducing him to Emily and Ethan, David felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was meant to be. They were meant to be Elijah's family, even if only for a little while. The first few days were an adjustment for everyone. Elijah was quiet and reserved, clearly unsure of his place in this new environment. But slowly, with patience and love, he began to open up. One evening, about a week after Elijah had moved in, David found the boy sitting alone in his room, looking at a worn photograph. "Hey, buddy," David said softly, sitting down next to Elijah. "What have you got there?" Elijah hesitated for a moment before holding out the photo. It showed a smiling woman with Elijah's same warm brown eyes. "It's my mom," he said quietly, "before she got sick." David felt his heart ache for the boy. "She's beautiful," he said gently. "You have her eyes." Elijah nodded, tracing his mother's face with a small finger. "I miss her," he whispered. David put an arm around Elijah's shoulders, pulling him close. "I know you do, buddy, and it's okay to miss her. We're not trying to replace her or make you forget her. We just want to give you a safe place to live and grow." Elijah leaned into David's side, silent tears falling down his cheeks. They sat like that for a long time, David offering quiet comfort as Elijah grieved for the mother he had lost. As the weeks passed, Elijah began to integrate more fully into their family life. He played board games with Emily and Ethan, helped Sarah in the kitchen, and even started to call David Dad, hesitantly at first, but with growing confidence. One Saturday morning, David woke up to find Elijah already in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes. "Good morning, Dad," Elijah said, his face scrunched in concentration as he stirred the batter. "I wanted to surprise everyone with breakfast." David felt his heart swell with love. "That's very thoughtful of you, buddy. Need some help?" Together, they made a stack of slightly lopsided but delicious pancakes. As they sat around the table, syrup dripping from chins and laughter filling the air, David caught Sarah's eye. She smiled, a look of pure happiness on her face. This, David thought, was what family was all about. The true turning point came one evening, several months after Elijah had come to live with them. They had spent the afternoon at the park, playing soccer and enjoying the warm spring weather. As they walked home, Elijah's small hand tucked securely in David's. The boy looked up with a serious expression. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with a mix of wonder and certainty, "I'm glad you're really here now." David felt his breath catch in his throat. He crouched down, meeting Elijah's eyes. "What do you mean, buddy?" Elijah shuffled his feet, suddenly shy. "Before, when I used to come to the park alone, I would pretend I had a dad who played with me. But now I have you. For real." David pulled Elijah into a tight hug, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "That's right, buddy," he whispered. "I'm here. For real. And I'm not going anywhere." As they continued their walk home, Elijah chattering excitedly about their day at the park, David felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The boy who had once been so alone, who had to invent a father to play with, now had a real family who loved him. That night, after tucking Elijah into bed, David and Sarah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. "I think it's time," David said softly, squeezing Sarah's hand. She nodded, understanding immediately. "To start the adoption process?" "Yeah," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine our family without him now. I want to make it official." Sarah leaned her head on David's shoulder. "Me too. He belongs with us." The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more paperwork, more meetings, more legal hurdles to overcome. But as David sat there, arm around his wife, thinking of the 3 children sleeping peacefully inside, he knew it would all be worth it. They had set out to change a child's life, to give Elijah the family he deserved. But in the process, Elijah had changed their lives too. He had shown them the true meaning of resilience, of hope, of unconditional love. As the first stars twinkled in the darkening sky, David made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to make Elijah a permanent part of their family. The boy who had once pretended to have a father would never have to pretend again. This was just the beginning of their journey together. But David knew in his heart that it was the start of something beautiful. A family once incomplete, now whole. A little boy, once alone, now surrounded by love. The soft glow of dawn filtered through the curtains as David stirred from his sleep. He glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 5:30 a.m. It was earlier than usual, but today was no ordinary day. Today was the day they would officially become Elijah's forever family. David slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and padded down the hallway. He paused outside Elijah's room, gently pushing the door open. The boy was fast asleep, his dark curls splayed across the pillow, his chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. David's heart swelled with love as he watched his son, because that's what Elijah was now, in every way that mattered. As the aroma of coffee and pancakes filled the house, the rest of the family began to stir. Sarah was the first to join David in the kitchen, wrapping her arms around him from behind as he flipped a pancake. "Good morning," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Are you ready for today?" David turned in her embrace, meeting her eyes. "More than ready. I've been ready since the day we met him." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of thundering footsteps on the stairs. Emily burst into the kitchen, her hair a wild tangle, followed closely by Ethan and a sleepy-eyed Elijah. "Is today the day?" Emily asked excitedly. "Is Elijah going to be our real brother today?" David chuckled, ruffling her hair. "He's already your real brother, sweetheart. Today just makes it official on paper." Elijah hung back a little, his eyes darting between David and Sarah. "Is it really happening?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really want to adopt me?" Sarah crossed the room, kneeling down to Elijah's level. "Of course we do, sweetheart. We love you so much, and we want you to be part of our family forever. Is that okay with you?" Elijah's face broke into a wide grin, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He nodded vigorously, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The family gathered around the table, digging into the stack of chocolate chip pancakes. As they ate, David and Sarah explained what would happen at the courthouse. They answered Emily and Ethan's questions about the adoption process and reassured Elijah that everything would be okay. After breakfast, there was a flurry of activity as everyone got dressed in their best clothes. David helped Ethan with his tie, while Sarah braided Emily's hair. Elijah stood in front of his mirror, fidgeting with the collar of his new button-up shirt. David appeared in the doorway, smiling at Elijah's reflection. "Need some help, buddy?" Elijah nodded, turning to face David. As David knelt to straighten Elijah's collar, the boy spoke softly. "Dad, what if something goes wrong? What if the judge says no?" David's heart clenched at the fear in Elijah's voice. He placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, meeting his eyes. "Nothing is going to go wrong, Elijah. The judge has already reviewed our case, and everything is in order. But even if something did happen, it wouldn't change how we feel about you. You're our son, no matter what any piece of paper says." "Okay." Elijah nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Okay, Dad." The drive to the courthouse was filled with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Emily and Ethan chattered in the back seat, while Elijah sat quietly, his hand clasped tightly in Sarah's. As they walked into the courthouse, David felt a sense of déjà vu. It seemed like only yesterday that they had stood in a similar building, being approved as foster parents. Now here they were again, about to take the final step in making Elijah a permanent part of their family. They were greeted by their lawyer, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Johnson, who had guided them through the adoption process. She led them to a small courtroom, explaining that the judge would be with them shortly. As they waited, David felt Elijah's small hand slip into his. He looked down to see the boy staring up at him, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Elijah whispered. David squeezed his hand gently. "It sure is, buddy. Are you ready?" Elijah nodded, a determined look settling on his face. "I'm ready to be a Thompson." The judge, a grandfatherly man with kind eyes and a warm smile, entered the courtroom. He greeted the family, his gaze lingering on Elijah. "Well, young man," he said, his voice gentle, "I understand you're here to become a permanent member of the Thompson family. Is that right?" Elijah nodded, his voice strong and clear as he replied, "Yes, sir. I want them to be my forever family." The judge's smile widened. "That's wonderful to hear. Now let's make it official, shall we?" The next few minutes passed in a blur of legal jargon and signatures. David and Sarah answered the judge's questions, reaffirming their commitment to Elijah. Emily and Ethan were asked if they wanted Elijah to be their brother, to which they responded with enthusiastic nods. Finally, the judge turned to Elijah. "Elijah, do you want David and Sarah Thompson to be your parents now and forever?" Elijah's voice rang out clear and strong. "Yes, I do." The judge's gavel came down with a resounding thud. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby declare this adoption final. Congratulations, Elijah Thompson. You are now officially a member of this family." The courtroom erupted in cheers. David swept Elijah into his arms, hugging him tightly as tears streamed down both their faces. Sarah joined the embrace, followed quickly by Emily and Ethan. As they left the courthouse, stepping out into the bright sunlight, Elijah tugged on David's hand. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "I never have to pretend again, do I?" David knelt down, meeting Elijah's eyes. "No, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You never have to pretend again. This is real, and it's forever." Elijah threw his arms around David's neck, burying his face in his father's shoulder. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. "I love you too, son," David replied, holding Elijah close. "More than you could ever know." The family piled into the car, all talking at once about their plans to celebrate. As they drove, Sarah turned to David with a smile. "Where to now?" David glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Elijah's eyes. "What do you say, buddy? Where should we go to celebrate?" Elijah's face lit up. "Can we go to the park? The one where we first met?" David nodded, a lump forming in his throat at the memory. "That sounds perfect." They arrived at the park, the same one where David had first spotted Elijah playing alone all those months ago. As they walked toward the playground, David couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. Emily and Ethan raced ahead to the swings, while Elijah hung back, his hands still firmly clasped in David's. "Go on," David encouraged. "Go play with your brother and sister." Elijah hesitated for a moment, then looked up at David with a mischievous grin. "Will you push me on the swings, Dad? Like you used to?" David laughed, his heart swelling with joy. Of course I will, buddy. Race you there? As David pushed Elijah on the swing, higher and higher, he thought back to the first time he'd seen the boy in this very park. Back then, Elijah had been alone, creating an imaginary father to fill the void in his life. Now, he was surrounded by love, part of a real family that would never let him go. Sarah joined them, wrapping an arm around David's waist as they watched their children play. "Look at him," she said softly, nodding toward Elijah. "He's so happy." David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Elijah's laughter rang out across the playground, a sound of pure, unbridled joy. It was a far cry from the quiet, withdrawn boy they had first met. As the afternoon wore on, the family gathered on a picnic blanket under a large oak tree. They shared sandwiches and fruit, talking and laughing together. Elijah leaned against David's side, a contented smile on his face. "Dad," he said, looking up at David, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Elijah hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Why did you choose me? Out of all the kids you could have fostered or adopted, why me?" David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "You know, Elijah, I don't think we chose you. I think you chose us. That day in the park, when I saw you playing alone, something in my heart just knew. You were meant to be part of our family." Elijah's eyes welled up with tears. "Really?" David nodded, pulling Elijah close. "Really? You've brought so much love and joy into our lives, Elijah. We're the lucky ones." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, the family packed up their picnic and prepared to head home. Elijah lingered for a moment, gazing out at the playground where his life had changed so dramatically. "Ready to go home, buddy?" David asked, placing a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder. Elijah looked up at David, his face glowing with happiness. "Yeah, Dad. Let's go home." And in that moment, surrounded by the love of his family, Elijah knew that he would never have to pretend again. This was real. This was forever. This was home. David's compassion and the bond he formed with young Elijah led to a heartwarming transformation, not just in Elijah's life, but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed their story. If David's story of kindness and second chances touched you, be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories of love, resilience, and hope. And before you go, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in David's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.